Welcome to the deep dive. Today we're diving into something really fundamental to being human, our emotions.
Right. But what if how we usually think about them is, well, maybe not the whole picture?
Exactly. This idea that they're universal, built-in reactions, each with its own specific physical signature.
Yeah, that classical view. We're going to explore a different perspective today, one that's, frankly, quite surprising from the science.
So if you're looking to get up to speed quickly on where emotion science is heading, you're definitely in the right place.
Our main guide for this journey is Lisa Feldman Barrett's book, How Emotions Are Made, The Secret Life of the Brain.
And our mission in this deep dive.
It's really to unpack this quite revolutionary idea that your emotions aren't just sitting there pre-wired waiting to be triggered. Instead, the science is increasingly pointing towards your brain actively constructing them in the moment.
Shaped by
Wait,
your experiences.
profoundly shaped by your individual history, yeah, your current situation, and even the concepts you have about what emotions actually are.
Okay, let's start with that classical view then. How most of us, think about emotions.
For generations, the standard thinking has been that feelings like happiness, sadness, anger, they're basic programs, evolved things.
The sadness you feel now is basically the same thing a caveman felt.
That's the core idea, yeah. Maybe different triggers, but the underlying experience is supposed to be universal and unchanging.
And this view assumes each emotion has its own distinct fingerprint, right?
Exactly. A specific facial expression, unique changes in heart rate or hormones, maybe specific brain areas lighting up.
And you see this idea everywhere, don't you?
Oh, absolutely. In movies, advertising. The idea that a sad face looks the same everywhere or that fear lives in one specific brain spot, it's powerful.
But here's the twist, the really interesting part.
Hold on.
Despite, 100 years of research trying to find these consistent fingerprints,
They haven't really found them.
not consistently, not for even one single emotion.
When they actually measure facial muscle movements, when people report feeling, say, angry, what they see is huge variety, not one set anger face.
Which kind of makes you question how accurately we think we read faces.
It does, and it's not just faces. The same variability shows up when they look at body responses, blood pressure, heart rate.
So my heart pounding doesn't automatically mean I'm scared.
It could be excitement, exertion, lots of things. And conversely, you can feel terrified without your heart rate going through the roof. Even the brain regions, like the amygdala and fear. It's not a simple one-to-one link. It's much more variable.
Okay, but what about all those studies where people do seem to recognize emotions in photos? The basic emotion method.
Ah, right. That usually involves showing people these very posed, often exaggerated faces, like caricatures of emotions.
And asking them to match the face to a word, like happy, sad, angry.
Yes, and people are generally pretty good at matching those specific posed images to the expected labels. You can see examples in figures 1, 2, and 1 of the 3 in Barrett's book.
But some scientists who hold on to the classical view might argue, well, maybe the studies that don't find fingerprints are flawed.
That's a fair point to raise.
I mean, studying emotion is hard, isn't it? Brain imaging isn't perfect, and things like sleep or caffeine can affect your body's signals.
Absolutely. It's complex. And ethically, you can't just induce intense terror in a lab volunteer for a study.
Right. You can't guarantee you're capturing authentic, strong emotions in a controlled way.
It's a real challenge for researchers.
Okay, so if the classical view has these problems, what's the alternative? This theory of constructed emotion, what's the core idea?
The fundamental shift is this. Emotions aren't prepackaged things with their own dedicated circuits.
They're not waiting in the wings.
No. Instead, your brain actively builds them, moment by moment,
Using what?
using more basic ingredients, and crucially, using the concepts you've learned about what emotions are.
You used an analogy before,
Mhm.
like baking.
Exactly. Think of your brain like a kitchen. You've got core systems processing sensory info from your body, the world. These are your basic ingredients.
Like flour, sugar, eggs.
Right. And just like flour isn't only for cake, you can make bread, pasta, whatever these brain ingredients are, multi-purpose. They're not just for emotion.
So the brain combines these ingredients.
Using recipes. And those recipes are your emotion concepts. Concepts like joy, fear, anger.
So my concept of sadness tells my brain how to combine those basic ingredients in a particular instance.
Precisely. And just like you can have different cookie recipes, chocolate chip, oatmeal raisin, you can have different instances of sadness constructed from slightly different combinations of those basic ingredients.
That makes sense. It allows for variety within an emotion category. What's that term again? Degeneracy?
Degeneracy, yes.
Yeah.
Different neural pathways can lead to what we experience and categorize as the same emotion.
Okay, so how do these concepts help us perceive emotions? The old view was just innate recognition.
The constructed view says you actually need the concepts to make sense of the raw data. Your brain uses the concept to categorize the incoming sensory information as an emotion.
It's not just recognizing something that's already there. It's an active categorization.
An active process, exactly. Using concepts learned over your lifetime.
Is there experimental proof for this?
Oh, definitely. Take priming. Remember the Serena Williams example?
Uh-huh.
If I prime you by saying screaming in terror before you see a picture of her face, even a neutral one, that terror concept influences how you interpret the visual information.
You see it as more fearful.
Right. And in those basic emotion studies, just giving people the list of emotion words beforehand primes those concepts. It shakes how they categorize the posed faces.
It gives the brain a framework, a set of labels to use.
Precisely.
So what happens if you take away those labels, those concepts?
That's where word interference studies are so revealing. They have people repeat an emotion word, say anger, over and over.
Until it just sounds like noise.
Exactly. It loses its meaning, semantic satiation.
Right.
It disrupts access to the concept.
And then?
Then they show them two faces without any words and ask, are these showing the same emotion? Their accuracy just tanks.
How much?
Down to about 36% correct. Figure 3-4 shows this clearly. Without easy access to the concept, judging if two faces show the same emotion becomes incredibly hard.
Wow. That really drives home how vital the concepts are. It's not just an optional overlay.
It seems fundamental to the process.
This isn't just in adults. What about kids?
Developmental research really backs this up too. Very young kids, maybe 2 or 3 years old, struggle to consistently label those classic posed faces until they develop more differentiated emotion concepts.
They might just say bad or mix up sad and mad.
Exactly. They use the words more broadly, like adults with low emotional granularity. Even if they know the word sad, they might struggle to see that two different frowning faces both represent sadness.
And infants. Can they distinguish emotions?
Mhm. Well, they can tell the difference between a smile and a scowl, sure. But that's likely a more basic sensory discrimination. It doesn't mean they're experiencing or recognizing happiness or anger in the adult sense, connected to complex concepts.
Okay, this all seems to challenge that idea of universal built-in recognition. But what about studies across cultures, like with the Himba tribe in Namibia? Didn't some suggest universality?
That research is actually fascinating because the results have been quite mixed. One study suggested universal recognition based on vocal sounds, laughs, cries match to stories. But when another team tried to replicate it carefully using the same methods, same translator, with other Himba participants, they couldn't reproduce the results reliably.
Really? What did they find?
They found only laughter sounds were consistently categorized as expected, and even then the Himba labeled them as laughing, not necessarily happy. Figure 3-5 actually shows one of the researchers working with a Himba participant.
So why the different results? It sounds like the methods matter hugely.
It seems the appearance of universality often pops up only under very specific conditions, especially when Western emotion concepts might be subtly introduced, maybe even unintentionally.
How so?
In the first study, for instance, participants explained the intended emotion in their own words before doing the matching task for each story. That act of defining might have nudged them towards more Western ways of thinking about those sounds.
So we might be accidentally shaping the results by how we ask the questions.
It's a real possibility. It highlights how our own cultural lens can influence what we think we're observing objectively.
It makes you think about other scientific facts that were eventually overturned, doesn't it?
Absolutely. Barrett makes the analogy to the luminiferous ether in physics a concept everyone believed in until evidence showed it wasn't there, paving the way for relativity. The classical view of emotion might be similar.
Okay, so let's get into the nuts and bolts. If the brain is constructing emotions using basic ingredients and concepts, how does that actually work neurologically?
A key piece of the puzzle is prediction. Your brain isn't just passively waiting for information, it's constantly actively predicting the sensory input it's about to receive.
Predicting from my body, from the world.
Both. It's trying to anticipate what's coming next to make sense of it all efficiently. Figure 4-3 in the book shows this balance between the brain's predictions and prediction error, the mismatch between what it expected and what it gets.
So my experience isn't just a direct reflection of reality.
A lot of your experience is actually generated internally by these predictions. The outside world acts more like a check, helping to correct errors and update the predictions. The brain builds a model, and sensory input refines that model.
It's constantly simulating reality.
In a way, yes. And humans are unique in our ability to run these simulations about the future, too.
Where do basic feelings fit in? Pleasant, unpleasant, energized, tired?
That's where the interoceptive network is crucial. It's a brain network constantly monitoring and predicting your body's internal state, your body budget.
Body budget, like resources.
Yeah, heart rate, breathing, glucose levels, inflammation, all the internal physiological stuff. The network predicts what these should be, compares it to the actual signals coming from the body, and makes adjustments.
So when I feel generally bad or off, it might just be my body budget being low, not necessarily something wrong externally.
Exactly. Intense exercise taxes your budget. You feel tired. Intense mental effort does too. You might feel drained or frustrated. It's your brain interpreting those internal signals about resource allocation.
That's actually a really useful way to think about those vague feelings. Okay, and how does my current feeling state influence how I see the world? Effective realism.
Right. Your current affect how pleasant or unpleasant, calm or activated you feel, colors your perception of neutral things.
Like the soldier example.
Yes, the soldier in a high-stress, fearful state misinterpreting a camera as a gun. The negative feeling likely influenced the perception of the neutral object, making it seem threatening.
Wow. So this process of predicting and then categorizing seems absolutely central.
It's fundamental. Every time you experience an emotion or see one in someone else, your brain is performing an act of categorization using your concepts.
But it's super fast, right? Not like consciously deciding this is sadness.
Oh, incredibly fast. Automatic. It underlies pretty much all perception and thought, not just emotion.
Okay, but we all have these mental images, these prototypes of what emotions look like. Frowning means sad. Wide eyes mean fear.
We do have those prototypes. But here's the paradox. When scientists actually look at people experiencing emotions in real life, those stereotypical prototypes, they're often not the most common expression.
That's weird. So where do the prototypes come from then?
The idea is your brain likely constructs them on the fly when needed. It draws on a whole population of your past experiences linked to the concept sadness, for example.
Like creating an average or typical instance based on memory.
Sort of, yes. It's like population thinking in biology, understanding a category based on its varied members, not a single ideal form. Your brain assembles a best fit summary for the current situation.
So categorization isn't finding similarities that already exist. It's creating them.
In a sense, yes. It's imposing structure and meaning. And emotion concepts are goal-based.
Goal-based, what does that mean?
Think about happiness. It can look like a smile, tears of joy, quiet contentment, jumping up and down. Physically very different.
Right.
What links them is a shared underlying goal, maybe feeling pleasure, connection, achievement. The category is defined by its function or purpose, not just physical similarity.
Can you give an example of how that works when we communicate?
Sure. Your friend calls after a scary, turbulent flight. She describes her pounding heart, the shaking plane. She constructs an instance of fear to tell you about it.
Okay.
When you hear her say she was terrified, you construct your own instance of fear. It won't be identical, you weren't feeling the turbulence, but you understand because both your constructions relate to the shared goal of detecting danger in that specific context.
So the word fear bridges the gap, linking your different experiences to the same underlying goal. How do we learn these goal-based concepts as kids?
Language is huge. Words give kids access to mental similarities goals, intentions that aren't obvious just by looking. Like if a baby hears the nonsense word wug applied to both a fluffy toy and a hard, smooth one, the word signals that these physically different things belong together mentally somehow.
It invites the brain to form an abstract category.
Precisely. It's how we build concepts that go beyond physical appearance, including emotion concepts.
And kids refine these concepts through experience, like the angry sneezing man story.
Right. Little Sophia initially miscategorized the man's sneezing face as angry. When corrected, she learned to adjust her concept, incorporating context the sneezing sound, to understand the facial expression differently.
It's a constant process of learning and refining based on feedback and context.
Absolutely.
And culture plays a big role in shaping these concepts,
Yeah,
right?
I touched on that.
A massive role. Think about languages with emotion words that just don't translate neatly into English.
Like the different Russian words for anger or the German ones, or concepts like legit among the Ilongo, which is sort of like an energizing, maybe even pleasant aggression, or Fago from Ifaluke culture, a mix of compassion, love, and sadness, often felt for someone needing care.
So learning Russian means learning to distinguish types of anger we don't explicitly name in English.
Exactly. You have to learn when serditsia, often anger at a person, is appropriate versus zlitsia, often anger at a situation. It's not because English speakers are missing a biological anger detector. It's a cultural difference in how underlying feelings get carved up and conceptualized.
And it goes beyond just words, into cultural practices and norms.
Definitely. Think about Bacha Mesquita's experience moving from the Netherlands to the U.S.
The cultural psychologist.
Yes, she found the American emphasis on displaying happiness, the constant smiling, felt quite different from Dutch norms. It reflected different cultural ideas about what happiness is and how it should be expressed. Her own more reserved style felt out of step.
It really shows how deeply culture shapes our emotional reality, often without us realizing it. Okay, so let's try to pull this all together. How does the brain do it? Prediction, concepts, culture. How does it create the feeling?
It seems to involve a cascade of predictions, starting in the interoceptive network, especially the default mode network. These predictions travel through the cortex, essentially creating brain-wide simulations.
Simulations based on my concepts.
Yes, instances of your concepts. Your brain generates multiple possibilities, multiple ways to interpret your internal state and the external situation.
And the one that wins.
The simulation that best fits the incoming sensory data in your past experience becomes your conscious perception. If that winning simulation is an instance of an emotion concept like joy or anxiety, then that's the emotion you experience.
Is this process managed somehow?
Yes, the brain's control network plays a key role. It helps guide the process, amplifying relevant information, suppressing noise, selecting the most appropriate simulation for the context, like a conductor orchestrating the predictive process.
So what we call emotion regulation, trying to manage our feelings. What is that from this perspective?
It's not like a separate module clamping down on an emotion. From the brain's view, it's just another instance of categorization.
How so?
When you try to calm your anger, you're essentially constructing an instance of the concept calm or regulation. You're using your conceptual knowledge to reinterpret your bodily sensations and the situation in a different way, leading to a different constructed outcome.
This really flips things on their head. It makes me think of that old question. If a tree falls in the forest.
Does it make a sound? Perfect analogy. The air pressure changes, yes, but sound. That requires a brain with auditory concepts to interpret those pressure waves.
And colors.
Same thing. Wavelengths of light are inherently red or blue. That experience is constructed by our visual system using our learned concepts for color. Believing our perceptions are direct copies of reality is naive realism.
So emotions are more like interpretations than objective states.
Exactly. Like color or even money, which only has value because we collectively agree emotions are a form of social reality. We use shared concepts built into our brain wiring through learning to give meaning and function to basic sensory inputs.
A racing heart could be excitement or anxiety depending on the concept applied.
Precisely, depending on the context and the categorization.
You mentioned 5 functions of these emotion concepts earlier. Can we recap those?
Sure. 1, they make meaning out of sensation. 2, they guide your actions. 3, they help regulate your body budget. Those are mainly internal.
And the social ones.
4, emotion communication, allowing us to sync up our understanding with others. And 5, social influence, using our perceived emotions to affect others' body budgets and actions.
So to really feel something like legit, your brain needs to have built the specific conceptual package for it.
Exactly. If you haven't learned that concept, your brain can't automatically construct that specific blend of feeling, meaning, and action, even if you experience some of the components separately.
This really changes the view of biology versus culture.
It dissolves that false dichotomy. Culture isn't just layered on top of biology, it actively shapes brain wiring and the concepts we develop, passed down through socialization and language. This cumulative culture is a huge human advantage.
It's still a bit mind-bending to think that even happiness and sadness have cultural flavors.
It can be surprising, yeah. People sometimes resist the idea, feeling their emotions are real and others are maybe less so. But Fago probably feels just as real and automatic to someone from Ifaluke culture as sadness does to you. It just depends on the concepts your brain predicts with.
So what are the big implications of understanding emotions are constructed? How can we use this?
One huge implication is empowerment. It suggests we have more influence over our emotional lives than we thought. If emotions are constructed using concepts, we can potentially learn to refine or change those concepts.
So we're not just victims of uncontrollable emotional urges.
The view suggests more agency, and it explains why finding those universal neural fingerprints has been so hard. The brain's variability and degeneracy, different neural paths to the same outcome, make it inefficient to look for one single pattern for fear.
This challenges that idea of essentialism, that emotions have a fixed essence in the brain.
Deeply. That essentialist thinking is often a barrier to accepting the construction view.
What about Darwin? Isn't he the bedrock of the classical view?
Actually, it's a common misunderstanding. Darwin argued that many facial expressions were useless, vestigial movements, leftovers from our ancestors, like our tailbone. He didn't see them as evolved, functional communication signals in the way the classical view often portrays. He used them mainly as evidence for common ancestry.
Wow, okay, so the history is more complex.
Yeah.
You mentioned a historic war between these views.
Yeah, this tension between innate essences, like Plato's view, and constructed perceptions, like Heraclitus, runs deep in philosophy and psychology. There was even an early lost chorus of researchers challenging essentialism in the 20th century, but their view faded, partly because they didn't have a strong alternative theory like constructionism provides.
And essentialism still hangs around today.
Definitely. You see it in AI trying to read emotions from photos, or in neuropolitics trying to link facial flickers to political views. It can lead research down less productive paths.
Okay, so if we accept constructionism, how do we get better at managing our emotions? How do we master them?
The absolute foundation is keeping your body budget healthy. Good sleep, nutrition, exercise, they directly impact the raw materials, the interoceptive signals your brain uses to construct feelings. Modern life often works against this, unfortunately.
So self-care isn't just fluffy stuff, it's biologically fundamental for emotional well-being.
Absolutely. Then emotional intelligence, or EI, gets reframed. It's less about just accurately detecting emotions in others, assuming they're universal signals. It's more about getting your own brain to construct the most useful instance of the most useful emotion concept for a given situation.
And knowing when not to construct an emotion, maybe.
Exactly. Sometimes just experiencing the physical sensations without layering a strong emotion concept on top is more helpful.
You mentioned emotional granularity before,
Yeah.
being able to make finer distinctions.
Yes. High granularity means you can differentiate precisely between, say, feeling disappointed versus frustrated versus resentful. Low granularity might just lump it all under feeling bad. Research shows people vary a lot in this.
How do we improve our granularity, our EI in this sense?
Actively learn new emotion words and concepts.
Yeah.
Pay attention to the nuances of your feelings and try to label them specifically.
Like becoming an emotion connoisseur.
Kind of. You can even invent your own concepts by combining existing ones. Think about that feeling when driving away from your hometown, a mix of nostalgia and sadness maybe. Naming it helps solidify it. Sharing it can too.
And this detailed labeling actually helps with regulation.
Research suggests it does. That spider study, for example. People who focused on categorizing the spider's features in detail, ugly, hairy, fast, manage their fear better than those just trying to reappraise, it's harmless, or distract themselves.
So getting specific helps manage the intensity. What about recategorization?
That's a key skill. It's consciously shifting the concept you apply to your bodily sensations. Those pretest jitters, are they debilitating anxiety or useful anticipation?
Like the karate instructor saying, make your butterflies fly in formation.
Exactly. Recategorize the feeling as energized readiness, not incapacitating fear.
Does this view also change how we think about the self?
It suggests the self might also be a construction, not a fixed entity, put together moment by moment from sensory input and concepts.
Which is why mindfulness helps, by deconstructing experience.
Plausibly, yes. By focusing on raw sensations without immediately layering concepts like, I am anxious, you can gain distance. Even experiencing awe, focusing on something vast outside yourself, can beneficially impact your body budget and sense of self.
Fascinating. Okay, let's switch perspective. How does this help us perceive emotions more intelligently in other people? You told that story about the psychiatrist and your husband, Dan.
Right. The psychiatrist saw Dan's concentration frown and instantly categorized it as anger, completely missing the context. It shows how easily our concepts lead to misinterpretations of others. Perceiving others' emotions is also an act of construction by us.
And cultural differences are a minefield here.
Absolutely. The Tsarnaev trial is a stark example. His lack of outward remorse was seen through a Western lens as coldness. But in his Chechen culture, public emotional displays in such situations might be very different, even discouraged. Our concepts shape our judgments.
Affective realism plays a role too, right? Our own feelings color our view of others.
Definitely. That Henry Louis Gates Jr. incident, the witness's own feelings and concepts about race and crime, likely influenced her interpretation of him simply trying to open his own front door.
This must have huge implications for the legal system. Eyewitness testimony.
The fallibility of memory, which is also constructed, is slowly being recognized more in legal settings. But the idea that judges are purely rational is also challenged. Justice Brennan said sensitivity to one's own feelings is inevitable and desirable in judging. Higher emotional granularity in judges could lead to better decisions.
What about understanding harm? Emotional harm, chronic pain.
The classical view often treats emotional harm as less real than physical injury, despite its known physiological impacts. And chronic pain, often a brain prediction issue rather than ongoing tissue damage, gets dismissed as just emotional if there's no obvious physical cause. Constructionism suggests these are very real brain-based states of suffering.
Could this change things like jury selection, assessing their effective niche?
It's a possibility Barrett raises. Understanding a juror's typical emotional concepts and responses could be relevant. It even leads to radical questions about whether trial by jury, based on assumptions about objective perception, is the best system given what we know about the brain.
Wow. Okay, one more big area. Animals. Do they have emotions like us?
We have to be really careful here to avoid anthropomorphism, projecting our experiences onto them, and essentialism.
What does the science suggest?
Well, many animals share a basic nervous system plan, but the detailed wiring matters hugely. There is evidence for basic affect, pleasantness, unpleasantness, arousal, calm, and macaques, probably other apes too, linked to their interoceptive processing.
But beyond basic affect, other mammals,
Birds.
fish.
Much more uncertain. And crucially, their concepts are likely very different from our complex, goal-based, language-linked human concepts. Their brain wiring limits their abstract thinking.
So dog feeling jealousy.
While we see behaviors we interpret as jealousy, there's no strong scientific evidence they experience that complex, concept-dependent human emotion. Primates, even chimps, show limited ability to teach abstract concepts to each other, highlighting how unique human language is for building shared social and emotional realities. A dog's affective world, shaped by smell and hearing, is likely very different.
What about fear learning in rats? That sounds like emotion.
It's complex. Rats show varied responses to threats, freezing, fleeing, fighting, using different neural pathways. Labeling it all as one thing, fear, based on our human concept, might oversimplify and mislead. Misinterpreting animal behavior through our lens can even be harmful, like punishing a dog for fear-based anxiety mistaken for dominance.
Okay, so wrapping up, what are the really big picture implications here? Biology, culture.
It shows the debate isn't biology versus culture, they're intertwined. Our biology provides the basic wiring, but culture shapes the specific concepts wired into it. Our social interactions are this constant dance of prediction and mutual regulation, shaping connection and empathy.
And the takeaway.
Understanding emotions are constructed is ultimately empowering. It highlights the brain's flexibility and our potential to change the meaning we make of our experiences through categorization and recategorization. There's still much we don't know about the brain, but knowing we construct meaning is a powerful starting point.
This has been incredibly insightful, a real deep dive that challenges so much of what we take for granted about emotions. For everyone listening, what's the single most important thing to take away?
I'd say it's that your emotions aren't fixed things that just happen to you. They're actively constructed by your brain, using your concepts, shaped by your culture and experience. They are dynamic, not static.
And knowing this helps how? What's the benefit for us day to day?
It can genuinely boost your emotional intelligence, not just reading others, but understanding your own constructions, gaining flexibility in how you experience and manage feelings, and having maybe a more nuanced empathy for others, recognizing their experience is also a construction.
So, a final thought for you to ponder as you go about your day. How might understanding that emotions are made, not triggered, change how you perceive your own feelings? How might it change how you react to the apparent feelings of others? It's definitely given me a lot to think about.
If you want to explore more, Lisa Feldman Barrett's website and social media are great resources.
Absolutely. Thanks so much for joining us on this deep dive.